All right, let me just move this water. All right. It was around midnight on May 3rd, 2016, whenever the satellite transmitter that was affixed to turtle PT160051 stopped working. The GPS was set to record the location every 3 hours, but no readings showed after 7:37 p.m. that evening. Richard Hamilton, the director of the Nature Conservancy's Melanesia program, grew weary after he saw this and decided to check the locations of his 9 other turtles. Upon doing so, they were all found. So he questioned if PT160051's transmitter had simply just malfunctioned. The next day, another turtle was deemed missing, so it was decided that something was going on. Hamilton had spent 2 weeks in the Arnavon Islands, where he tagged 10 different turtles in order to collect data where females were migrating to during and after their peak nesting seasons. One night while he was patrolling on the beaches, a conservation ranger spoke to him about poachers on Socopo Beach, which is a beach on the Arnavon Islands, and he decided that he needed to talk to John Pita about this. After they spoke, they decided to call a group of rangers together and have them camp out on the beach in order to monitor and protect the turtles during the time when the poachers were supposed to come. During a shift change, the replacement crew was held up due to fuel shortages, which meant the beaches were unguarded, and the poachers knew this, so they took action. Upon the rangers' arrival, the poachers grew really violent, which forced them to retreat, and the next day, John Hamilton and PETA were able to talk, and it was concluded that turtles PT160051 and PT160048 were killed due to poachers. Resulting from this illegal trade on the hawksbill sea turtles, their species has been listed as critically endangered. Over the past 100 years, their populations have declined by 90%. There have been laws such as CITES put into place in order to try to protect these turtles and other animal species similar to them, but the demand for the hawksbill sea turtles still stands high on the black market today. The hawksbill sea turtle story is one of many that go to show that mankind's actions have disrupted the natural balance of nature and have harmed biodiversity tremendously in the process. My name is Natalie Rex, and I'll be talking about the effect of mankind's actions on nature. A couple limitations are going to be set up, mostly due to time restraints. First of all, there will be little to no discussion about climate change, except for later on in my discussion, I'll talk about one contributing factor that could possibly affect future generations. The reason I won't be talking about it is mostly because it's so controversial, and there's a lot of argument about whether climate change is even a real thing or not. Also, it could become an entirely different discussion in itself, and most of all, it just pulls away the attention from the issue at hand that I'm trying to show, even though it does obviously play a vital role. Another thing is I will not be talking about the cost of future or current conservation acts. This is just because it's not necessary in understanding my issue. Even though the acts are an excellent way to help my issue, the first step is to prove that there's actually something going on and that these acts are something that are needed. And this leads me to my third limitation, is that I'm not trying to solve the issue at hand. I just want to establish the fact that there is an issue. Some background also needs to be gone over, starting with the fact that mankind's population is increasing, which is going to result in environmental issues. Lawrence McGinty talks about this on an article that I read, and he says that it took all of human history up till 1804 for the world's population to reach 1 billion. The next billion came only 100 years later in 1927. After that, the growth rate accelerated, reaching 3 billion in 1959, 4 billion in 1974, 5 billion in 87, and then skipping ahead, 7 billion in current times. It is projected to reach 9 billion by the year 2050. Although the rate is no longer growing exponentially, which means steady and unchanged, it is still growing, which means that there will be consequences on our environment that come with this. Another issue that needs to be talked about is the change in extinction rates that have happened over time. So in 2014, the Science Learning Hub shed light onto this, and they said that evidence from the fossil fuel record shows that there have been at least 5 mass extinctions during Earth's history. The most well-known is the Cretaceous Tertiary extinction, which resulted in the disappearance of the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. The significance in this is that the natural extinction rate simply means what was life like before mankind populated the Earth. Once, such as during the Cretaceous Tertiary theory, these extinctions were able to be the result of natural occurrences, whereas now it seems like the present extinctions are all due to mankind. The final issue that I need to establish is that current environment laws are being taken away, or they simply haven't done enough. There was a 2019 New York Times article posted by a woman named Nadja Popovich, and she says that Trump's administration has been rolling back a lot of environmental issues or rules and laws that have been established in the past. Her data was based off of studies done by Harvard and Columbia Law School, along with a couple of others, and basically they show that under Trump's administration, there have been 58 rollbacks completed, there are 37 in the process, and there are 90 in all. So a couple examples of these are one, the requirements for oil and gas companies to report methane emissions has been canceled, along with there was an Obama rule that has been weakened under the Trump administration, which calls for a reduction in air pollution in national parks and other wilderness areas. And then finally, under the Trump administration, they permitted the use of seismic air guns for gas and oil exploration in the ocean, which was originally blocked by Obama's administration because of the fact that it kills marine life and it disrupts fisheries. So the combined actions of mankind have led to nature's natural destruction in almost all aspects. First, it can be seen through the increased human population growth. Second, the actions of mankind have polluted ecosystems all over the world, from the highest mountains to the lowest or deepest oceans. And finally, one of the leading contributing factors to this issue is the fact that mankind has become reckless, lazy, and ignorant. In order to reverse these consequences that we have brought, we have to become more knowledgeable about our environment and what we can do to help it, and understand that it's not too late to fix and preserve the earth that we call home. One of the most significant ways in which mankind's actions have disrupted nature's natural balance can be seen through the increased population growth rate of humankind. As our population increases, the health of our environment notably decreases. This affects animals and ecosystems all over as they suffer from our growth. Because with our growth, that means other growth has to happen in order to meet our demands, such as the supply for housing, it obviously has to go up. And then the expansion of urban areas begins to take place, and other construction has to happen in order to meet what we need. The result of this is that thousands of animals are losing their habitats, and they're being forced to relocate if they're not obviously just being killed. Whenever the relocation process happens, their natural adaptation process is affected negatively, and their overall safety is at risk. The growth of mankind also results in excess air pollutants, which I will get into. The destruction of landscapes reduces available habitats and food sources for animal species. Petra Sumis-Gunter, who has a PhD in animal ecology, talks about this, and he says, globally, more people live in more urban areas than in rural ones. Africa and Asia are urbanizing faster than any regions in the world. By 2050, 67% of the world's population is projected to be urban. Then he gives a couple examples that are a little bit older, but he says like Nigeria was projected to get an additional 212 million urban dwellers by 2015. So this shows that as this growth happens, there will be challenges in a sustainable development and public health, and then animals who cannot keep up with this fast-moving growth will begin to disappear. As this destruction of wildlife happens and urbanization growth begins to take place, the animals become endangered as well as people. So the way that animals are affected is by the fact that they do not belong in urban areas to begin with. That is not where they're naturally from. So as they relocate into these areas, their natural instincts are affected and they begin to lose them, such as their anti-predator responses, which means they're more immune to getting killed. For example, deer and squirrels are one major way in which you can see this. As you notice, like in Elkins Lake, um, the deer populations are heavier in these urban areas where they're not supposed to be, and they become more used to, moving life like cars and golf carts and just human interaction in general. And as they become less threatened by it, they get killed, like they get hit with cars, and that's obviously bad. Sarah Spear talks about this in her undergrad thesis, and she says that a lack of responsiveness by prey may have consequences if prey are incapable of differentiating between non-threatening perceived predators and real predators. Other factors are also threatening the animals as they relocate into these urban areas, and this can include the threat of pets, fast-moving city life, lack of food resources, and the threat of human contact overall. Humankind can also be threatened because these animals can come with diseases, and then unwanted predators can obviously inflict harm if they're afraid or they just feel the need to protect themselves. The result of this habitat loss has become the primary threat to wildlife species in the US today. Another visible factor that the human population rate affects has come with air pollutants. National Geographic talks about this, and they say that outdoor air pollution, both in cities and rural areas, prematurely killed 3.7 million people worldwide in 2012. Keep in mind, air pollutants are man-made. This is something that we have caused, mostly by, greenhouse gas emissions or things like that. So air pollution really negatively affects agricultural life. Heather Burdo talks about this, and she explains that animals, they depend on oxygen that comes out of the air as well. And whenever this air is contaminated and there are harmful gases and particulates in it, when the animals inhale this, it sits in their tissues over time, which obviously causes damage to their organs. And not only can they inhale them, they can also get these out of their food and water, and it can go in through their skin. Understanding the issue of air pollution is necessary in order to make it stop. So NASA posted an article about air pollution and to gain more awareness on it, and they explained that certain gases in the atmosphere cause this to happen. For example, ozone is a major cause. Whenever ozone is high up in our atmosphere, is actually good. That's its purpose. But whenever it's low, then we have a lot more health issues because the purpose of ozone is to sit high and it keeps radiation from the sun from, getting to us. So after looking at this, it's clear that the cause of air pollutants is due to mankind, and particularly the increase in human population and urbanization. Some like to argue that the human population isn't growing exponentially, therefore we don't need to worry about the long-term effects of it. One of these people would be Peter Kariva, and he says that the human population rate is likely to peak within the century. Therefore, environmentalists need to start thinking a lot less about our population rates per se and more about the drivers of increasing resource use and greenhouse gas emissions. In response to this, although the rate is no longer growing at an exponential rate, which means constant and unchanged, that doesn't mean that we need to stop focusing on the dangers that come with these population growths. It would be illogical to say that dangers are only the result of an exponential growth rate, because human population grows, although it takes time, it doesn't take a long time, depending on, what you're looking at, for the environment to have some drastic change take place. And you can't look at the numbers and decide that this is what determines the sustainability of our environment. Another area in which you can see that mankind has affected nature's natural balance is through pollution. Humankind has contaminated ecosystems everywhere, and air, land, and water pollution are causing extreme levels of harm to our planet. Air pollution, which is the result of fossil fuels, can create a lot of health issues in, people and animals, mostly respiratory. And then land and water pollution are the more common forms, and these can be the result of litter or the dumping of chemicals by larger industries. Land pollution affects wildlife, plants and trees, humans, and it contaminates drinking water for both humans and for animals. And water pollution destroys ocean animals' habitats and places their lives in danger. The most discussed form of pollution these days seems to be ocean pollution. This is currently affecting marine wildlife more than it ever has. An author talks about this, and he says that over the last decade, we've produced more plastic than we have in the last 100 years. This sharp increase in plastic entering our waters harms not only marine life, but also humanity. An example of this was seen in 2010, whenever a large gray whale was found dead after being stranded in shallow water near Seattle. They opened up its belly and they found that its stomach was filled with more than 20 plastic bags, a golf ball, and other forms of rubbish. Also, its intestines were lined with a piece of plastic wrapper. Then another example that's more common is whenever you hear about the sea turtles. Over half of the sea turtles worldwide have ingested plastic, and all it takes is 14 pieces of plastic to place them at an increased death risk. Some of these turtles starve to death because after they think that they've eaten, they falsely believe that they're full, and then they end up dying. So ocean plastics, including microbeads and microplastics, are causing so many unnecessary marine life deaths. And this is obviously the result of mankind's actions. Simon Reddy talks more about the result of ocean plastics, and he says that according to the UN, at least 800 species worldwide are affected by marine debris, and as much as 80% of that litter is plastic. While plastics are estimated to take up to hundreds of years to fully decompose, some of them break down much quicker into tiny particles, which in turn end up in the seafood that we eat. So the threat of plastics on ocean life is tremendous, but there are other contributing factors. A recent study has shown that the garbage and waste being dumped into the ocean is a major factor in this, as 1.4 million pounds of garbage is dumped into the ocean every year. So millions of marine life species have been dying at the hands of this as well. In addition to plastic production, cruise ships have played a vital role in this. An author writes about this topic, and they basically said that cruise ships are allowed to legally dump untreated sewage and other waste into the sea due to lenient laws that let them operate with little to no environmental regulations. These are very toxic. Obviously, the waste contains pathogens, bacteria, oil, and heavy metals that are harmful to the marine life. This is really unsettling because the growth of the cruise ship travel industry has grown and evolved into a widespread popular attraction for all ocean areas. And it's really unfortunate that the laws have been so lenient because it's having such a negative effect on the marine life. If the process of ocean pollution from plastics, garbage and waste dumping, and littering carries at this rate, ocean life will certainly be ruined. There is an environmentalist who posed this question. He says, have you ever thought about what the world will look like in 100 years? Will it look better than it does today or worse? The truth is that nobody can see the future. However, with ever-increasing human population, there is one major problem that has been getting worse over time: land pollution. This is extremely dangerous for wildlife as it destroys their habitats and it harms the animals themselves. It can be the result of various factors, such as excessive farming and agricultural activities, the dumping of non-biodegradable waste or trash, mining and extraction, industrial waste, construction, deforestation, excessive dumping in landfills, and obviously littering. The most noticeable form of pollution would be littering, which is obviously an act of mankind. Animal habitats are being ruined and dirtied because of this. And one way that it's especially visible is regardless of how big or small cities or towns are, you can drive down almost any road or highway, and you're almost always going to see some form of litter on the sides of the streets. This is all due to mankind's laziness, and the same thing can be said for bodies of water, other areas that should not have litter in them whatsoever. Daryl Jones, a Mississippi State professor, talks more on this and says whether it is an animal with a container stuck on his head or one that has swallowed a plastic bag and is suffering from an intestinal blockage, trash can cause terrifying or possibly deadly consequences, even the most unintentional littering. This quote goes to show that the smallest actions that help cause land pollution have the potential to result in extremely detrimental consequences for wildlife over time. The effects of agricultural pollution also play a role in this, as the use of pesticides and fertilizers on farms has increased dramatically, and it kills thousands of fish and insects in the process because it can be, it can get other places to run off and things such as that. Some people like to argue and say that if there is being technology that has been used to clean up plastic waste from water and from the land, then humankind can keep on producing these plastics and using them. Back in 2013, there was this foundation called the Ocean Cleanup, and they designed this piece of technology. It was a 2,000-foot long plastic tube that was designed to trap marine plastics that bobbed within 10 feet of the surface of the ocean. So someone read this article and they said that, well, if we have technology such as this to clean up after ourselves, then can't we just depend on technology and keep reducing our plastics? There is a woman named Kathleen Hall Jamieson, and she directly responded to this question by saying, of course, the risk is that touting a technological solution to this plastic pollution might make people feel that their individual actions do not matter. The danger is that we say, oh, there's a fix, so I can continue drinking out of my plastic straws, carrying my groceries home in my plastic bags, and drinking water out of my plastic bottle. These efforts also need to have an argument about individual responsibility of putting the plastics there to begin with. In addition, there's just not enough technology in the world to clean up after everything, especially with the growth of mankind being so large. You can't just clean all the oceans or it would have already been done. So, if we were to depend on technology, this would go against the creation mandate, which is God's order to mankind that's telling us that we need to take care of his creation. Mankind has been reckless, lazy, and ignorant, which has carried extreme environmental consequences, and we have gone against this direct call from God. Seemingly small decisions, such as throwing a Whataburger cup out of your car window, to larger ones like developing a neighborhood, all add up more than people realize, and it harms our environment. Due to us overlooking this fact, ecosystems are reaping extreme consequences due to our actions. Our ignorance and recklessness had driven the Earth into its sixth mass extinction. Whereas in the past, extinctions could be explained by natural phenomena, it appears to be that the current extinction that we're facing is completely driven by only one species, and that species is ours. There's a source that says that the rapid loss of species we're seeing today is estimated by experts to be between 1,000 and 10,000 times higher than the natural extinction rate. In addition, our planet now faces a global extinction crisis never before witnessed by mankind. Scientists predict that more than 1 million species are on track for extinction in the coming decades. So the question is, how were we able to drive an extinction this vast? Whenever we look at past arguments, evidence for this goes to show that things such as construction, urbanization, habitat relocation, air, land, and water pollution have all fueled this quite well, but what else? A man named Jeremy Hance says that the current extinction is the result of four specific causes, which he calls the four horsemen of the sixth mass extinction. The first horseman is that of global homogenization of flora and fauna. He personally kind of defines this, and he says that this means that you can eat tomatoes in Italy, hunt oryx in Texas, ride horses in Chile, curse cane toads in Australia, dig earthworms in eastern North America, and catch rats in the Galapagos. None of these things would be possible without human intervention. Our penchant for globetrotting has brought innumerable species to new habitats, often wreaking havoc on existing ecological communities and sometimes leading to extinction. The second horseman that he discusses is that humans have become the top predator over time. He says that no other species can claim such a distinction. In doing so, humanity has begun using 25 to 40% of the planet's net primary production for its own purposes. This data is based off of humanity's demands, including the use of forests for timber, carbon emissions, fish stocks, cropland, and so on. The global footprint also says that humanity will need 5 additional Earths in order to produce the resources necessary to thrive if all humankind lived the way that Americans do. The third horseman that Hans talks about is that humanity, in a sense, has directed evolution. Geologist Mark Williams adds to this, and he says that never before have animals and plants been translocated on a global scale around the planet. Never before has one species dominated primary production in the manner that we do. Never before has one species remodeled terrestrial biosphere so dramatically to serve its own trends. This means that mankind is the only species on Earth that has taken another species out of its natural habitat and relocated them globally into places where they do not belong, and they have been forced to adapt and change to that place. Also, no other species has used all of the natural resources in the way that we have. And finally, no other species has taken advantage of that and used the biosphere so selfishly that has consequently reshaped it. The fourth and final horseman that Hans talks about is called the technosphere. He defines this as the vast and sprawling combination of humanity and its technology. This is a relevant issue because after hundreds of years of being able to control technology, and this includes really old technology like stone tools, wheels, and crops, technology has begun to act more independently recently. So technology now has the power to globally transform and disrupt the Earth, along with bringing on future extinctions. Technology is the creation of mankind, so this serves as an argument for the fact that we have been disrupting the natural balance of nature. If the actions of mankind continue the way that they have, then future generations will also be at harm. If we continue having the mindset that says, I'm not personally affected by this right now, so I'm going to let other generations or other people deal with this instead, then Earth will no longer be a safe place. It already isn't the place that it once was, but this will only add to that. Environmental issues have been impacting all areas of life, including work, travel, resource availability, and more. The ADAC group says that environmental problems make it apparent that solving complex issues requires the cooperation of all sectors. Environmental issues affect every individual, organization, community, and country, and by becoming environmental stewards, it keeps the economy moving, which is necessary for growth and long-term viability. The fact that environmental issues are able to affect our economy often goes unnoticed. Pollution itself affects our economy. The ADAC group talks about this, and they explain that the more heavily polluted areas make it extremely hard for companies who are located there to hire and retain workers, and they're also forced to pay them higher wages in effort to attract and keep their employees. If we became more knowledgeable about this and the fact that environmental issues could affect our futures and our jobs and such, then maybe we would care more about our environment. In addition, climate change has the opportunity to affect future generations. There is one major factor that needs to be noticed, and it's the long-term effect that is due to ocean and air pollution and destruction of habitats and ecosystems. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United States kind of talks about this, and they said that climate change will affect all four dimensions of food security. And these are food availability, food accessibility, food utilization, and food systems stability. In refutation, some people, especially those with the mindset that I talked about that says, I'm not personally affected, so I'm going to let someone else deal with this, might argue that the planet has not been all that impacted catastrophically by humankind. And then they begin to question if we're actually responsible for the unbalance of nature. Some other people believe that we're not actually destroying the earth, but we're just merely changing it. Ronald Bailey says that humans are helping improve biodiversity by moving thousands of species around the world in order to increase local biodiversity everywhere. He also says that as plants and animals populate new regions, they start down different evolutionary paths that are already transforming them into new species. First of all, in response to this, evolution and species changing from one to another is not a real thing. That's not possible, but that's also subject to change based on what you believe. Second, humankind has unarguably done plenty of great things for our environment, but there is no denying that mankind's presence and actions have caused significant harm. Earth is no longer the place that it once was, and it is our duty to take care of it. Backing this up, an article on The Guardian, which is an environmental website, says that what we are doing now to the world by degrading the land surfaces, by polluting the waters, and by adding greenhouse gases to the air at unprecedented rates is all a new experience to the earth. It is mankind and his activities that are changing the environment of our planet in damaging and dangerous ways. In conclusion, let instances such as the hawksbill sea turtles being poached, killed, and driven towards extinction in the Audubon Islands serve as a reminder that mankind is negatively impacting the environment and other forms of life in which we have been ordered by God to take care of. Genesis 1:28 says that God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over fish of the sea, and over birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." Genesis 2:15 also says that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. These verses are what make up the creation mandate, and there are three ways in which we have failed to obey it. The first is that we have allowed the growth of mankind to hold more weight than protecting biodiversity or what God has given us. The second way is that we have ignored the effects of pollution and allowed it to cause harm to the environment in which we have been called to care for. The third and final way is that we have become reckless, lazy, and ignorant in making decisions that affect the environment and future generations. I would like to leave you with a quote by Sandra Diaz that says, "Life on Earth is an intricate fabric, and it's not like we're looking at it from the outside. We're threads in that fabric. If the fabric is getting holes and fraying, that affects us all." Thank you.
Very nice. Very
Thanks.
nice.
Oops.
Does it feel good to have it over?
Yes. Really good.
Before we get started on questions, there's a couple things I want to point out that for me were very technical strengths. As I've commented, and I have the advantage of seeing her paper, and one of the comments I made in her paper was she does a very, very outstanding job at weaving supporting evidence in and out and very, very conversationally. So that carried through in your presentation. For me, arguably the strongest aspect was the structure. There's a big boy topic, and it's tough to keep it reined in. And I thought you had a nice, tight structure that allowed you to do that. So good job on that. So now, anyway, Q&A.
Oh, can't hear.
Natalie, you did a really good job with your presentation. I'm just a little bit curious, as you were talking, you referred to animals as species and humans as species. Was that intentional, and why?
Oh, that wasn't like a deeper meaning to that, if that's what you're asking. I guess there were certain points in there where they were, where I needed to say that because they have the same, there's some effects or things that affect both of them, but I didn't intentionally do that. I guess that's one of the things I probably should have thought about. But it definitely wasn't intentional.
Okay, good answer, but you did a good job.
Thank you.
So in all the research, everything you've run across, give me two of the biggest takeaways you found surprising. Because we're all aware of this issue. I mean, and yeah. What'd you
I think, let me think. The first one that comes to mind is I had no idea that there was another extinction taking place. I never really heard anything about that up until I started looking at this. And most websites that I came across, they all talked about it and that there was something, going on. And I was sitting there and I was like, well, what's going on? And how can this many species be getting, how can they all be dying? That's a lot of numbers that they're posing. That shocked me because as I looked for answers for that, I never thought about, they're not just talking about animal species. Obviously it ranges between, you have your land animals, your ocean animals, plants, all types of things. I just never realized that it was that big. And then another thing that was interesting was, well, to me, was the more basic pieces of evidence that they would show in order to explain how threatening things are. I'm personally fascinated by ocean life. So whenever I was reading about all the things that were, like the way that, like turtles, for example, are affected by plastics, and whenever I was researching for my opening story, I found a lot of interesting things about just stuff I'd never thought about, like when people go to the beach, how badly that affects like turtle life. I had no idea. So it was interesting to read about all of that stuff, in my opinion.
I know that you mentioned the cruise ships and them and dumping.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know the answer to this, and I'm wondering if you do. Do we see that there are just a lot of countries that are using the ocean to dump their trash? I mean, did you find that in your research? Are we using it as a waste dump?
The main thing that I've noticed, I forget what it's called, but there is that big place, and it's straight trash, and they're having trouble finding out how to clean it out, and it all just accumulates in this one spot. I don't know about people who are intentionally, like, as a large group of people, using the ocean as a source to dump their trash into, but there's basic stories that could go, to show that, like the individual who just throws, their trash in the ocean or something to get rid of, or like people who throw wedding rings in there, stuff like that. But I'm not sure about that.
Okay. I know that some states in America, for example, are extremely stringent in their rules about disposal, and then others are not. Other states are not. Mm-hmm. And are we just not doing? Is it like we're just not doing enough? As a country, as the world. What do you? I know you said you weren't going to be looking for your topic's not you're not going to share looking for solutions, but it gives me food for thought. What do we do next?
Well, how
can I make it different?
There's an opinion. I've noticed this before I walked into this project. I think that it is, if you look at individuals, obviously there's around 7 to 8 billion people in the world. There's so many people who have the same mindset. The one that I brought up that's like, oh, well, it's just one piece of trash, like throwing paper out of your window, things like that. Well, there's other people who think that way. And the more you do that, the more this these issues accumulate, you think like, well, it's not a big deal. Well, then there's, you have 3 million other people saying, well, it's not a big deal. And those decisions all add up. But what to do about that? I think that's for this issue that I'm talking about, that's a personal decision that you have to realize that issues bear consequence. But as a whole, there's people doing movements. I think a lot of stuff is really political that has to take place. So I'm not exactly sure how that would go about, but that's my opinion.
I see. I've really enjoyed your topic. You've worked very hard, and it's evident in your presentation. And then I got the opportunity to see some of your PODs too. So those are pretty awesome. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, if no one else has anything, Natalie, you can put a bow on this and call it a wrap.
Yay!
Good job. Excellent job.
Oh, that's cute. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.